At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES Podcast. I am Greg, joined always by Joe.
Hello.
And we are bringing you today episode number 219. A pick that I want to say was Joe's because he's more experienced with this game, and I assume the franchise than I do. We're looking at the Super NES port of Jungle Strike. Which I know from talking to Joe off mic a little bit, he's mostly played the Genesis, so I'm curious to see what he thinks about the Super NES version of the game. I have never played Jungle Strike on Super NES. I play the game. I also play the game like other systems as well too. So in a way, this is both familiar and not familiar to us at the same time. But anyway, so why don't we open up a little bit, Joe, by just basically saying your history and your exposure of the game and the franchise, because I think you probably have more to say on this than I do. So,
yeah, so this is one of those games that I think I originally rented it, brought it home, and it was literally just one of those. It's a good rental. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it was just one of those, I flew around, I shot things, blew things up, and when the weekend was over, I gave it back to Blockbuster. And I didn't think anything of it. But apparently, at some point, my mom, or my dad, but I'm going to say most likely my mom, must have found a copy of it cheap for the Genesis and ended up, becoming part of my permanent library. This is a game that, I have experience with it, but I don't have as much experience as I do now, because it was one of those, how do I explain this? I just like to mess around. So, if I'm in the mood to just get in a helicopter and go shoot things, I pop in Jungle Strike. That was kind of my mindset. It wasn't, I'm going to do the missions, I'm going to go, try to get and beat this game. It was just one of those, okay, I want to go fly around and shoot things. So I pop in Jungle Strike, and that was very much the experience I had growing up with this game, which of course kind of jolted the system when we decided to cover it here for the podcast, because there's actually a lot going on in this game.
Yeah. The only problem with us having made our list months in advance is that I don't really remember at this point which one of us would pick this game. Yeah. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's you because I said you have more experience with this game franchise than I do. So I'm pretty sure this was your pick, but
I'm pretty sure this was my pick just because I know the next pick was yours.
Oh yes, so. Definitely. Yeah. So, So I am curious as to why I picked this game. Like not the other games in the franchise, which are also on the system, but we'll get to that later on. So that's actually a good segue. I knew going to this podcast that there were other Strike games. The franchise is just simply called Strike, by the way. So, right. But I knew there were other games. I didn't realize how many games that there had been released in a series because it was the first three games in the series. Desert Strike 1992, Jungle Strike 1993, and Urban Strike 1994 that were ported to most systems and got the most attention. So the later games, Soviet Strike 1996 and Nuclear Strike 1997, it looked like they're good games. They just didn't get the press or the coverage that the earlier games did for various reasons.
Yeah, and I have to say, Nuclear Strike was definitely the pinnacle of the series. It had those great, really cheesy full motion video cutscenes, and obviously, when I played it, it was a PlayStation game. So it had great sound effects, crystal clear sound effects, which was nice for the time. Yeah. And the graphics were, I mean, for the time, they were incredible. Now they haven't aged very well, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, Nuclear Strike is definitely one that I have a soft spot for.
Right. There actually was a planned trilogy in the works called Super Strike Trilogy with the first 3 games of the franchise planned for the Sega CD, but it never came out.
That's too bad.
Later on, Electronic Arts, who are the original creators and publishers of the game, did release a collection called EA Replay that has some that some of the Strike games on it. But there was a planned 6th game in the franchise that called Future Strike. But that game ended up going through a lot of changes. Eventually came out as a totally different game called Future Cop LAPD.
Oh, okay.
So if you play that game, know the DNA of that game comes from Future Strike. So,
and that makes so much sense because Future LAPD is literally like you're in a mech, but you're doing the same thing that you're doing in the Strike games, where you're going around, you're shooting missiles, you're gunning people down. So yeah, I love Future. Future LAPD was probably one of the first games that I got for my PC back in late '98. Yeah, late '98. It was summer of '98 when I got my PC, and it was the one game that I could run.
It also says here in the box it came with a comic book, so that's a nice touch.
Oh, nice. Yeah, but it was like the one game that could run at like 800 by 600 and still look fantastic, and not, slow down or anything like that with my onboard video. So, yeah, that's another game.
A lot of early games were designed for that resolution as their max. I mean, Doom, Command and Conquer.
Right.
But a lot of the classics of the '90s, that's what they ran at because that's the most that CRT monitors could support. So
yeah.
But nowadays, I think the smallest resolution that you can even go is like 1024 by 768. So, things have to come a long way. The series has come a long way too because all 5 of these games are very similar to one another in gameplay. I mean, we can talk about the generalizations that we make for the franchise. Will accurately describe Jungle Strike pretty well. Then we can focus upon what makes Jungle Strike unique and or different. Yeah. Basically, each game in the franchise, you're commanding to start off with at least a high-tech helicopter. You do get to control other vehicles in some games for short periods of time, which is a nice touch. So, but basically, you're in a helicopter with a co-pilot, flying around on a 2D, 2.5D graphic graphic engine, just like going around the map, blowing things up, trying to stay alive. All being told to you in a story, it's very 90s. The gameplay is also very 90s, 90s because it's a shooter. And it's a shooter that I think people in the 90s loved and craved because of Doom and whatnot. Right. But nowadays, I think people want more meat to their shooters. Yeah, I think it's a reason why this franchise has stayed in the 90s. Like EA has never tried to do a revival of it. So, also the plot in many of these games, it's also very heavy 90s. Very raw American, semi right-wing, as far as it goes. I mean, it's funny still, but it's also definitely a product of its time.
Yeah, I was gonna say the story in Desert Strike is Saddam Hussein and his regime and whatnot. So it's by the time you beat Desert Strike, you've toppled Saddam Hussein's empire, and then spoiler here on Jungle Strike, you're dealing with his son because Saddam's dead. So now you have to deal with his son, and it's still Bill Clinton as president, which is fantastic. And it's just one of those things this really takes you back in time and sets you in that period of 1992, 1993, 94, that time period.
Right. So, definitely. So we might as well, since you already brought it up, might as well just finish covering the plot because it's interesting. they do try to do a plot in this game. I mean, there's cutscenes and whatnot, so there actually is. So you actually have something to look forward to when you finish a mission. But like before, the plot's actually like very like basic, kind of like bare bones, like very 90s, whatever. So you've got two bad guys. One of them's the son that Jordy mentioned, like the first game. The other guy is a South American like drug lord. So the game basically opens up with them trying to do a nuclear attack, planning to do a nuclear attack like the U.S. And you are hired, or basically not really hired, kind of like recruit or whatever to go out and to go out in this copter and stop them. So like to go through the game's various stages. You're never really described very well in the games. Like you're just like a lone special forces pilot, very cocky of your, very arrogant, kind of like doesn't seem to take things seriously. So it's kind of surprising to see. It's kind of surprising to see a pilot who's like laid back and chill, nonchalant like about things. So
see, and I would agree with you if this game was made today, but this was made in the 90s.
Yes, exactly.
He was that way in Desert Strike as well. And like you think about the times, like what was popular and what was kicking off, and it was like Sonic and like Aero Acrobat and like different mascots like that who had attitude. Like attitude was all about what was going on. You even had like the Looney Tunes, Bugs and Taz, wearing their clothes backwards and trying to be cool and all this other stuff. So like it was definitely an attitude of the time for sure. And this game definitely captures that. And I agree. Like he's a cocky little pilot, but also like, considering he toppled Saddam Hussein, and it took us 22 years to finally do that. So, he's got every right to be cocky.
Right. So
he did it in one game.
So Jungle Strike uses the same engine pretty much as we mentioned that the Desert Strike playing the games also use. It's actually the game engine actually came over like when they attempted a flight simulator, which kind of makes sense if you think about it because. EA was trying to do a flight sim to see if they could compete with like the, Microsoft's the flight simulator, but the end results in the end decided just to turn into this game instead. So the game also took heavy inspiration from the game also took heavy inspiration from both Matchbox toys, which again kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Right.
And a game I love dearly, which is like an old classic computer game which I grew up with, Choplifter, which we have covered the sequel to that game on this podcast previously because the pseudo-sequel at least came out with Super NES as well too. Choplifter has some similar concepts. You're basically just piloting a helicopter, fighting enemy lines, trying to destroy enemy forces, and blow up buildings to rescue hostages, and trying to get and the goal of the game is just to get as many of the 64 people back to safety alive well as you can. So Jungle Strike. Was as a Jungle Strike, the whole Strike franchise I already mentioned previously was developed and published by EA. The original game, Jungle Strike, the original console that this game came out for was Genesis. The Genesis is the one that was designed for. Electronic Arts developed and published the game on the system because they didn't have a contract with Nintendo at the time. However, because of the success of Desert Strike, they licensed out the game to other companies to port to various systems. Because this game did come out on a lot of systems. Besides Genesis, it also came out for DOS, the Amiga CD32, the Game Gear, the Game Boy, and eventually, like through the collection, the PSP.
Yeah.
So, as well as the Super NES. The company that handled the Super NES port of the game is called Gremlin Interactive. They were a British company, so therefore most of their games were British and or European based. and probably we don't know much of them here in the West, because a lot of their games did stay in Europe. However, some of their games did come over here to the West. They have a pretty good track record. I wouldn't say they had some successes. The company was around from 1984 to 2003. We probably know the best here in North America, like for the Zool games, the Premier Manager games, which are the Premier Crop Soccer games, like for a long time.
Yep.
Motorhead, Fatal Racing. What else did they do? They came over here. A lot of car racing games. The Actual Sports franchise was also theirs. So they also did a port of Hero Quest, the board game for various systems as well. So pretty good company for the most part. Just most of their games didn't come out here like in the North America, because they're a British company. Some of the games are designed with like a European sensibility.
So were they behind the unreleased NES port as well for Hero Quest?
I did not look that up. Let me see here.
Because, I played that prototype. That's actually a very good conversion of the board game to a video game. They did a great job. So if that was them, kudos to them.
I don't know. I'm trying to look it up like right now. It looks like I'm trying to see if anything on here says. Let's see.
So if you listeners don't know, while Greg's looking that up, I am a huge fan of Hero Quest.
You're right. Gremlin was behind that project.
Okay, yeah, so, and that was a fantastic prototype that I played. Obviously, you could tell it's unfinished, but what is there is fantastic, and it actually, for other Hero Quest fans out there, it actually takes the prototype. I think has the first 5 quests that are actually in the actual quest book of the board game, so it's kind of cool to be able to play those and have those visual effects to them.
Well, if you do want to play the game complete, Hero Quest did come out for various computers, so it'd be very easy to play that nowadays like an emulation. It came up for the it came out for the Amiga, the Atari, the Commodore 64, DOS. There was even a sequel. A sequel made as well to Hero Quest 2, like for the Amiga systems. So,
all right. Well, guess what I'm gonna have to be looking for after the podcast.
I'm sure about the C64 and DOS versions like run very well in emulations.
Today,
yeah. So, but anyway, Gremlin was eventually bought out by Infogrames, who became Atari. Most of the trademarks of Gremlin, however, are now owned by Warner Brothers, because Atari sold a bunch of their stuff a while back to raise money. So, I took a look at the Genesis original as well for this. It looks like, for the most part, Gremlin did an excellent job of putting this game over, I thought. It plays very, very, very close to Genesis original.
Yeah.
Just like a few minor tweaks to be expected for different consoles. But all in all, like, it's a very impressive port. So, did you also think it was a good port, Joe?
Yeah, I actually thought this was a very good port.
Yeah, because you played the Genesis version, like you said originally. So
yeah. And I didn't. I was planning on going back and playing the Genesis version, and I just didn't get around to it.
Fair enough.
But from what I remember, like, to me, I didn't notice anything different. But then again, like I said, I didn't go back to play the Genesis one, so I couldn't really compare. But yeah, everything felt the same here. The missions are fantastic for what they are, but we'll get into that with the gameplay and whatnot. But,
well, that's fine for segue. Go with the gameplay then.
Yeah, so I will give you a heads up. For this game in today's age, it is going to probably take you a little while to get used to the controllers. It took me a little while to get used to once again, but up moves you forward, down moves you backwards, left and right makes you bank as you fly. It works rather well, and it's pretty good to be able to coast through open spaces and whatnot. But Targeting your weapons, on the other hand, isn't as precise. Depending on the co-pilot you select, that actually changes how things are.
Yeah, that was an aspect of the game I really liked. The co-pilot actually has a difference. The co-pilot actually, the co-pilot in many of these games is just here for flavor, but in this game, it actually has a difference. It has a difference of gameplay. So
yeah, and like my strategy was basically, fire off a couple bullets to kind of get an idea of where you're hitting, and then from there, once you got it zeroed in, then you can just unload with your other ammunition, whether that be, the Hydras or the Hellfire missiles, because those are limited ammo and you don't want to waste those.
Right.
The maps are rather large, for what they are. I'd say it takes generally about average 30 to 45 minutes to complete an entire level.
Depends upon your skill level, like also upon the stage. Most long plays of this game online average around 3 hours, give or take a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, I was taking my time, but I was also like, this is the first time, like I discussed, this is like the first time I was actually doing the missions and everything. So, you got several missions that you can do, and you have to do them, obviously, to successfully clear an area. There's a good amount of variety in them. There are, you'll have to find a set of targets and destroy them. You'll conduct rescue missions, capture nuclear material, collect intelligence, by, capturing enemy leaders. At one point, there's an escort mission where you have to escort, there's a couple, I think 2 escort missions, if I remember correctly.
One at the beginning,
and one of them,
the end,
you have to escort the president. They kind of mixed it up this game. Not only do you have the Apache helicopter, but you also get a hovercraft. You can get a motorcycle and a B-1 bomber. Out of all these, in my opinion, the hovercraft was probably the best one.
Hovercraft I enjoyed the most, yes.
Driving around on the motorcycle I'd rather be in my helicopter, and the B-1 bomber to me it did not work that well. But
just to make a couple of small corrections, like nobody that calls out for it.
I should mention here is this game, and you might agree with me, you might not. This game feels slow, and it's not so much that the game is slow. I think the maps are so large and kind of empty that it feels like you're moving slower than you actually are.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That being said, this game, let me tell you, this game opens up, chef's kiss, almost perfection. You can't make this up. Like, your first order of business in this game is to basically shoot and destroy, as I described it, all the Winnebagos and VW buses with people with rocket launchers trying to fire missiles at you in the capital of Washington, D.C. That was definitely a fun mission to go around and do that. But I think that's pretty much it. I mean, gameplay is pretty solid. Obviously you got your, choice of either just using your guns, then you got your Hydras and your Hellfire missiles. And it's a good variety there. And like I said, being able to switch vehicles is kind of nice because it kind of just shakes things up. But, it's the hovercraft is really, in my opinion, the only good alternative vehicle that they give you. But that second mission, using that hovercraft to take down an entire submarine was ridiculous. Talk about a scenario that you just like, what? That was definitely interesting. But kind
of like a James Bond movie.
What about you, Greg?
The hope it. Yeah, exactly. I hope it's kind of like out of a James Bond movie, for sure. So, I agree with most of what you said. Just to make a couple of small corrections here, because a small correction what you said, just just so nobody that calls it out for it. Mm-hmm. The helicopter you find in this game is actually supposed to be like an enhanced version, like of a Comanche, like attack helicopter.
Yep.
And you're flying and later on you're flying not a B-1, but actually like a different jet. But actually, like a different jet called the S1E219.
Oh, okay.
So the F-117 Nighthawk was actually like a stealth attack aircraft. So, but anyway, okay. As far as the maps go, I don't think the maps are actually that huge. I think the reason they feel huge, like, is because you're actually you're actually flying, and as a result, the overall gameplay, I thought, kind of on the slow side. I mean, you think of helicopters being fast, but you're not really flying around the map very, very, very fast. You're not zipping around like you would, like I think most people would expect to do in a game like this. Most stages the gameplay is very much more slow and methodical. Just like trying to go around, circling around enemies or circling around enemies like you actually manage to hit them with something.
Right.
Which goes back to the targeting problem that Joe was talking about earlier. And trying to blow up buildings to find bonuses or rescue people or whatever, and just go engaging bosses. It's fine for what it is, but again, it's like the gameplay now versus then really comes into stark contrast here of this. For sure, because the gameplay is perfectly fine still. Don't get me wrong, but it's a much more slower paced, methodical like a helicopter shooter. And like Joe said, the controls do take a while to get the hang of. Once you get the hang of it, it's fine. So targeting never really feels 100% right, but at least you get to the point of the game where it's like you can at least manage to hit something like 2 or 3 tries.
Right.
Unless it's it's the people with the hardest things to hit because they hit because they hit the smallest hit boxes.
Right.
Cars, tanks, ships, those are fine usually because it's like you have big hit boxes to work with. But people with missile launchers can definitely drive you nuts.
Yeah. Especially
early in the game before you actually get used to things. So. We already talked about the graphics a little bit here. The graphics, the engine uses like a what's now called a 2.5D perspective. It wasn't called that back then, but but it really is the perspective of what it is. I think the graphics look pretty good. I mean, like the helicopter's large, well defined. Enemies look good. There's a variety of stages. The backgrounds of car and car pilots for those are pretty lacking. You can tell they did asset swaps for many of the stages, but at least the helicopter enemies look good.
Yeah, and one of the nice little tricks that they pulled that I kind of liked was there's a nighttime jungle infiltration mission that you got to do. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool. It's dark. You really get that feel for it's at night. And then you have your targets kind of lit up a little bit. And then when you fire your missiles and it makes contact with the target and it explodes, it lights up the entire map. And it looks like it's daylight, and then it goes back to black. I thought that was really cool how they did that. Not something huge, but, it was one of those nice little details that I didn't expect to find in a game like this. Normally, it would be like, oh, it's nighttime, you blow something up, it's whatever. But, they really paid attention to the details there.
Yeah, exactly. So, music is fine for what it is. To be honest, I thought the music was actually I thought at least the music was one of the weaker points about the game because it's pretty forgettable. I mean, it's not it's a fine soundtrack. It is what it is, but it's like shooters usually live or die by soundtracks, and this one is a very meh soundtrack. I thought overall. I mean, It sounds fine. It sounds fine. It's just not very inspired.
Yeah, and this is one of my biggest problems with this game. So my exact quote in my notes was music, where, and what. So there is no background music. When you're playing through the missions, there is no music at all, which is really weird. But yet, they had decent music for the opening title, and for the cutscenes, there's, decent music that fits the mood. But, I don't know if, they just couldn't get, the sound effects to work properly with the background music or something like that. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Is it going for a realistic approach to where you're legit in a helicopter, so therefore you don't really have music, which could be argued because people do still listen to music in helicopters anyways. But yeah, this was, I agree, one of the weakest points of the game, unfortunately.
I was trying to get the point across that actually there was no in-game music, but it's but even the opening music and the cutscene music or whatever it's still not great.
There's nothing to write home about. It's serviceable.
The sound effects, however, are excellent. I mean, the helicopter blades, the shooting the guns, the death screams.
Yep.
Very good sound effects.
Yeah, the sound effects are very satisfying. I actually really like that.
So no problems there. The main gripe I have about gameplay is the fact that the developers went with a streamlined approach, which shows no information to you at all on the screen. Right. You have to actually go into your status screen to find out actually how much fuel you have left and how much armor you have left. So
or you just crash.
Or that too, which is also very aggravating. I mean, I like having gauges on screen. It's I've never liked games that try to do a very minimalistic approach like that. It's if it's important, show it to the player all the time.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's just that's the biggest gripe I have about the gameplay. But that said, you can work around it at least. So So we already covered the controls.
Yep.
Here's a point that got some controversy because people kind of feel different ways about this. Overall difficulty. What do you think about the overall difficulty of this game, Joe?
I thought it was okay. I don't. So it's like what we discussed earlier. It's the small hitboxes on the humans that really kind of kills it. Because when you're firing at buildings or vehicles, it's satisfying. It feels great. But when I have to circle and strafe and, continually use my machine gun to mow down one little guy with a rocket launcher while he's hitting me every single time he's firing his rocket launcher.
Yep.
That just makes things super frustrating. And there's certain points in the game, where you have missions where you don't have a choice. You have to take out these little guys. It's part of the mission. So it's just one of those things where it's I get where they were going. Obviously, it's a smaller target. You're going to have a harder time hitting it with your giant helicopter. But at the same time, it's a game. It doesn't have to be super realistic. And I just think it would have been a little bit better if they would have increased the hitbox even 50%. If they would have increased it just by 50%, that would have been enough to be able to at least hit them. And it would have been a much more enjoyable game.
And that wouldn't have been as much of an aggravation if the targeting were better also. But
right.
But again, given the pads, the controls you had to work with, the time periods, I'm not sure how. I'm really not sure how much. I'm really not sure what else I could do.
Yeah.
Maybe have a lock-on button. Push one button to lock on, and slam the button to shoot.
Yeah, that would have been nice. But I mean, at that point, then you're using your missiles probably more than they want you to, and those are also in limited supply. So I don't know. I would like to see how this game would be on, say, one of the microcomputers, a Amiga or an Atari ST or something like that. Where you have a joystick and you have the extra buttons to do all this other stuff. I think it would play better in that scenario than with the D-pad and the 6 buttons available on the Super Nintendo controller.
Yeah, possibly for sure. So, but yeah, so that combination about the hitboxes and also targeting adds most of the frustration to this game, because it's like it's a little bit like Wizard of Oz from last week, actually. Last episode, where it's like there are things here that add aggravation to the player, but whereas in that case, where we kind of attribute it to more like sloppy programming or a rush development cycle. In this one, in this case, I think it was more the developers trying to make the game hard on purpose.
Right.
Like these things, because the game's like well programmed. I mean, and also, there were some complaints from reviewers of the time period about this, but our griping seems to be more of a modern complaint as well too, which also says a lot. Some people felt the game's too difficult because of the combination of what we just talked about, and also some of the boss enemies being very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Other people, however, thought the game was too easy. So it's just one of those weird cases where I guess your skill level and your experience with games of this type going into it makes a huge impact as to how easy, quote unquote, you find the game or not.
Yeah, and I can see how some of the enemies could be considered easy. Like when you're in that second mission where you're on the hovercraft and you're having to take on the submarine.
Sure.
The submarine can only shoot in X amount of directions, and it can only shoot X amount of times. And so it leaves itself open to where you can maneuver yourself easily around and continually to shoot the submarine. And yeah, it's a bullet sponge, obviously. But, eventually you can take it down with this little hovercraft. So I can see where, there are those people who think it's easy, and then those who think it's, maybe a fluff challenge, because is it right that submarine should be a bullet sponge just because it's much larger than you are? Or, was it too easy because it only has certain range as far as firing? So
yeah.
I think it really comes down to the perspective and what you are, kind of what you said, your skill set. If this is the type of game that you play and you're good at it, you're probably going to find it to be easy. If this is not something that you normally would play, then you might find it to be difficult, and both answers are correct, in my opinion.
So I also wanted to bring something else reviewers at the time. Well, one reviewer, at least at the time, mentioned your thoughts on it. One review of the game basically said that the game that the main downside about the games is it was ported to computers as well. He was basically saying this game was designed first and foremost for console gamers. Console gamers have short attention span than computer gamers do, which I think was probably true in the 90s.
That's fair.
But yeah. So it's like nowadays, with everything being cross-platform and whatnot, you really don't see that anymore. But, in those days, there was as we talked about before in the podcast, there was a much sharper divide between console gamers and computer gamers. So it's like, it's like I think about it before I read it, but I'm like, yeah, he's got a point, because it's like, console gamers tended to gravitate more toward games like this, and therefore, I think you had RPGs and whatnot, which were like longer games, but those were niche. Those were always niche games during the 90s anyway. So it's right. It's an interesting point.
Yeah, and you got to figure, most computer players, they had the text-based games, and if they didn't have those, it was the point and clicks like Monkey Island. And so I completely get it. I completely get what he's saying there, because he's right. Like, most PC games were more involved than what you would have on the console, because if you tried to give something like Monkey Island on a console, which obviously wasn't able to at that time, but like if you were able to get that onto a console, Maniac Mansion, there we go, for the NES. look how overlooked that game is. And it's a fantastic game, and it's a great port of what LucasArts did on the PC, but point in case, like, people do not have the attention span to be able to sit down and play that game.
Maybe, but I love the NES version of Maniac Mansion personally, but, just like, it was the music alone that, I saw that game.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a good segue to wrap things up. We already talked about it a little bit, but how do you feel about this game now in 2023, Joe? Do you think there's somebody who can still appreciate and enjoy this game now, or is this more of a game that's a product of its time? It definitely a product of its time, but it's like is the fact it's a 90s game, do the downsides make the game unplayable like nowadays?
I could probably think of about 10 different shooters that I would rather play than Jungle Strike. And, they're more modern. I just think, the targeting issues, the fact that it feels very slow and methodical, this is definitely a product of its time. This would be considered new technology if you want to look at it that way as far as consoles go. Desert Strike would have been like really the first one that kind of pushed that. This being the sequel, people are looking forward to the innovations to the gameplay and the, maybe the upgrade in the graphics or whatever. In today's 2023 eyes, I look at this and I say, yeah, I'd rather play something else. I don't hate it because, it's a decent game for what it is. But if you told me that I could play this or I could play, I don't know, some other shooter like R-Type or whatever, I'm going to play R-Type.
Yeah. I agree with you partly. I do think this game is very dated in many ways for the reasons that we talked about. Again, I would say that. As I often like seem to end up saying, there is a certain group of people out there who I think would enjoy this game still. Obviously, anybody's a fan of the Strike series still who missed this one for whatever reason should definitely check it out for sure. Because I agree with you that the PlayStation ones toward the end of the franchise are definitely the premiere, but Jungle Strike is still an excellent game. As far as Strike games go. Helicopter-based shooter games are fairly rare even nowadays. Mm-hmm. There were a few other games out there, such as Airwolf for the NES and Infiltrator like the NES, but there weren't many helicopter-based shooter games of this type. So even nowadays, there still are not many. So
right.
I think if you're looking for like a good classic helicopter shooter game, this is also a fine game to check out. Also,
yes.
Beyond that, though, I agree with you. This is a case of not the fault of the game itself, just like product. Just a product like 30 years having passed since then.
Right.
With the fact that it's still perfectly fine, well designed, well programmed, well put together game that's still fun to play. I'm sure it bursts, but I think that unless you fall into one of those two categories I talked about, there are better shooters available on both Super NES and also other more modern systems that can definitely take care of they definitely do this. They do this better for you, which is a shame. You're just like, I'd like to see what a modern Strike game flavor nowadays they would look like. But because I think it would be like a fun game. But EA has a habit of burying franchises, unfortunately, without doing anything with them for forever. So
right.
I think unfortunately there's another one that's locked away for like probably forever at this point. I never want to say we don't want to say never, especially when it comes to games, because like Nintendo suddenly announced suddenly announced a 99 multiplayer version of F-Zero out of nowhere last week.
Right.
Which is also a franchise that had been dead for like a long time.
Right.
So with games, you never know. But I think I'm probably safe in saying we're never going to see another Strike game again. But having said that, I do think that probably I agree with Joe. The last game of the series, Urban Strike. I'm sorry,
Nuclear Strike.
Future Strike actually was the last one.
Oh, okay.
Which is available on PC and PlayStation. If you can play it, it's probably the best game in the series. But anyway, this is fun to play. The before and after games, Desert Strike and Urban Strike also came on the Super NES, so we may cover those games at some point in the future too. So. To see how those ones compare vis-a-vis this one. But most reviews of the game, as I already mentioned, back then were pretty positive. The Super NES version did not rank quite as high as the Genesis version, even though I think the two ports are very, very similar, and some people would argue the Super NES version is even better. But probably it's because of the fact that the Genesis version came out first, and therefore whatever version of the game comes out first, that's kind of like your breadwinner. That's your gold standard to compare everything else to. Activator Game Rankings gave Genesis version of the game 85%, with Super NES version only 72%. So, but still, like I said, most reviews of this game that came out back then were very positive. So the game definitely, the game reviewed well, sold well. Probably a lot of people who play our generation, around the 90s, probably played at least one Lego Strike games. So, EA did say that about 3 million copies of the franchise sold eventually. So, decent sales. So, but anyway, each version of the game had different cheat codes and/or tricks into it. For the Super NES version of the game, there's not much, unfortunately. So there is the only thing present in this version of the game is the 10 lives code, which is a password that you can use to start the game with. One password for the Japanese version, one password for the US and European version. Because I forgot to mention the game did get a worldwide release because of its popularity. So it was released in Japan, North America, and Europe as well. So anyway, 10 Lives code definitely something I recommend using if you're a newbie starting out with, because it will certainly help. That and save states, of course, but
right.
As long as you don't consider save states cheating. So so eBay. Game's fairly common to find on eBay because I said it's sold pretty well. 59 copies of the game were listed as research. 69 copies of the game sold recently. Prices are pretty average for Super NES game. Reasonable. Again, I think it's because of the high supply that's out there. So these prices include shipping. So. The card-only versions of the game sold anywhere from $11 to $46.
Okay,
so
that's not bad.
CIB sold anywhere from $58 to $82. And for some reason, this game has an unusually high amount of sealed copies available. I found 7 copies of the game that I sold recently that were all sealed in various conditions. And again, because of that high amount. Well, vis-a-vis sealed copies of the game, like I said, usually you find 1 or 2 of them, you're lucky, but 7's unusual. Because of that, sealed copies of the game sold for pretty reasonable prices, anywhere from $83 to $130.
Okay.
So, $11 for a cart, definitely a good price. So, I have no problem paying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so as I mentioned before, this game was included in a Fighting collection that's on the PSP. Beyond that, you want to play this, which actually is used. Let me confirm this real quick. I believe that version did use the Super NES version of the game. Let me just see if I can confirm that real quick. it may have used the Genesis version of the game, since the Genesis version of the game is the original version after all, and some people do consider it to be the most premier version. Genesis version of the game. Okay. So, but anyway, still. So anyway, that's Jungle Strike. You know, like Desert.
Jungle Strike.
All these strike games slightly confused at this point. Yep. So, it's a good game for reservations, I think, but it hasn't aged well. I think in some areas, definitely through like no fault of the game itself. But anyway, so. We may check out the other Strike games available on the system at some point in the future, Flames World 2. So I never played this version of the games. So this game was fun. Fun to check it out for sure. So, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to say about the game, Joe, before we wrap up here?
No, I think we've pretty much said it all.
Okay, all right. So anyway, we always. We always appreciate you listening to us as always. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, whatever, feel free to email us at the SNES Podcast yahoo.com or leave it on our Facebook page. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30, and I have a very public Facebook, not PG, and I do the Radical Retro Roundup podcast, which can be found at any wonderful place you listen to your podcasts, including this one.
Cool. Yes, you've done some pretty good work over there recently for sure. So
thank you.
Well, you're welcome. But next time we're staying with on this podcast. We're staying with the theme of shooters. We're just going in a very different direction with shooters this time. This time as well. So we are looking at the one game. I don't know why only one game came out of Super NES in this franchise. I'll have to research that to find out why, because we're looking at the one game for the system that came out here. One of the Paredes games. Which is a comedy / parody version of the popular Gradius games by Konami. The one game that came on the system, and I'll do my best to pronounce it. Jiko Oshibiri Paredes is the full name of the game that we're going to be covering. If you want to look at the game and or play it beforehand, so.
And that's a game that's like Gaiden or Gaiden. It's all depends on how you pronounce it. So some people do pronounce it as Parodius. Just I don't want people to be like, "What the hell is he talking about?"
It's the same way. Yeah, it's the same way I say Gradius. Gradius, like some folks say like Gradius. Yeah, so I mean, it depends. So, but yeah. So anyway, I've played several of the previous games and enjoyed them. You never played this one, so I'm curious to see how Super Famicom version of it plays.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Like I said, while we were talking off mic, I've had experience with Sexy Parodius on the PlayStation, and that's really the extent of my experience. So to be able to experience this one on the Super Nintendo is going to be fun for sure.
Yes. So, but anyway, thanks again as always for listening to us. We hope everybody out there stay safe, be well, and we'll catch you again next time. Take care, everybody. Later.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man. Now you're playing with power. Super power.